Well, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Allegra Elson. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as Director of Training and Development with Vibrant Pittsburgh. We're excited to share our Community Partner Speaker Series with you. Today we will be in conversation with Level Up, the Greater Pittsburgh Pay Equity Campaign. It's powered by the Black Women's Policy Center, YWCA of Greater Pittsburgh, and Women and Girls Foundation. With us is my colleague Matthew Yohe. He will monitor the chat and also contribute to the discussion. And we'll also be introducing you to our speakers very soon. So today's session is part of our Community Partner Speaker Series. It brings together you, Vibrant Pittsburgh members and guests from across industry and sector in an informal, interactive, and participatory atmosphere to collaborate and deepen knowledge. Take a moment, please, to say hello and introduce yourself in the chat. And very briefly, I'll be introducing you to our speakers today, Angela Reynolds, Camilia Rivera-Tinsley, and Rochelle Jackson. This session is being recorded and will be available on our member resources section on our website. If you are a Vibrant Pittsburgh member and need your member login, please let us know. And as always, please check out our website at vibrantpittsburgh.org. A little bit about Vibrant Pittsburgh. Vibrant Pittsburgh is a premier economic development membership organization dedicated to supporting the growth and economic competitiveness of Pittsburgh as the region's central resource, spokesperson, and convener on workplace belonging and inclusion. Vibrant Pittsburgh's mission is to accelerate the business community towards equitable, inclusive, and diverse workplaces, creating a future-forward region. Vibrant Pittsburgh envisions a future where Pittsburgh employers offer inclusive workplaces that foster prosperity and belonging, making them a top choice for people of all backgrounds. As today's discussion will be participatory, we ask you to embrace the following community agreements and acknowledge that your attendance today signifies your commitment to these community agreements. It is our collective and personal responsibility to uphold them. Seek to understand. Actively listen before responding. Use I statements. Speak from your own experiences and feelings. This avoids generalizing about other people and communities that are not your own. Respect privacy. Respect the stories other people share and request permission before sharing them with others outside of our space. And share the air. Make room for all voices to be heard and accept all modes of communication. Modes of communication today will include use of the chat, unmuting, polling, and also time to take notes and reflect. So I'd like to take a moment to review our agenda. We started with some brief intros. Next, we have a few questions to level set and draw you into the conversation right away. And then I'll be turning things over, or really I will be in conversation with Angela, Camilla, and Rochelle. Of course, we're going to have a question and answer time after I talk with them, but feel free to drop questions in the chat as they occur to you. So we'll have a little bit of polling coming up here. There are different modalities in which we're going to engage with you, but first will be a Slido. So first of all, this is a Slido poll. You can use the QR code with your cell phone, with your camera app, with your cell phone. Excuse me, or if you're on the computer, you can go to slido.com and input that number, to be part of this question here. It is a word cloud, so I'd like you to take a moment and think about this question. What words or thoughts come to mind when you hear Level Up, Pay Equity Initiative? So take a moment, think about the question, whatever thoughts or words come up, it will be a word cloud, and we'll take a look there. So I'll hold in quiet as you're thinking about the question. And when we see those words get bigger, that means more of you have chosen those words. So more of you are adding, agree with those words there. All right, let's take a look. So bigger words we see equity, gender equity, and closing the wage gap. Okay. I'm interested in the phrase long haul fight. So we know that this is a long haul fight. We know that our panelists today have been working on this for quite a while. So being paid for knowledge and ability, leveling the playing field, fair practices. So I'm seeing that word fair pop up quite a bit too. Okay. Not focusing on what the person made before also and stepping up to do better. Yeah. Matthew, what's popping up for you?
Yeah, so a lot of the same things here, and I'm seeing also, as you mentioned, leveling the playing field as a kind of a reoccurring theme here as well. And then we see hope, development, help as well. So
Mhm.
all good themes that are popping up here.
Yeah, great. All righty. Okay. Now I have a true or false question for you, and I'm going to ask you to drop your answer in the chat. So true or false, pay discrimination only affects women. Is that true or is it false? You can, give me a shout out. You can unmute and give a shout out. You could drop that in the chat. What do you think? Is this true or false? Mhm. I'm keeping an eye in the chat here. Matthew, have any true come through yet?
Does not look like it. A
Does not
resounding
look.
response to false here.
Yeah, exactly. So of course you are correct. Pay discrimination is not just a women's issue. It can affect anyone, including people of different races, ethnicities, genders, ages, and ability. We do know that women, and particularly women of color, experience pay disparities. Other groups such as men of color, people with disabilities, immigrants, and older workers also wage discrimination. All right. So as we get ready to talk to our panelists about these, this is a sort of a ranking, a poll for you. Which do you think is the biggest barrier to achieving pay equity? And this is just a vote. If you were using the Slido before, it should pop up again for you. So take a minute to vote on what you think is the biggest barrier to achieving pay equity. And know that we're doing this also for our panelists, for them to get an idea of who's in the room too and what you're thinking about. Give you a few more moments here. So we have one interesting note in the chat. The policies would be implemented if the biases weren't present, unfortunately. And are seeing that most of you, about 62% of you who participated, did say that it's based on cultural biases. And then 29% of you said organizational policies, and then 5% a lack of awareness. And we also see about 5% at other. So yeah, thank you so much for participating in all of these. So but we're still pretty high with cultural biases. So let's get into it. I'm really excited to get into this conversation and be with Angela and Camilla and Camilla and Rochelle, excuse me. So what I'm going to do is just give a quick introduction to three of our panelists. I'll stop sharing and then really turning the discussion over to them. So Angela Reynolds, PhD, serves as Chief Executive Officer of the YWCA of Greater Pittsburgh. Camilia Rivera-Tinsley is the CEO of the Women and Girls Foundation. And Rochelle Jackson is, focuses full time on the Black Women's Policy Center Incorporated. So I want you to take a moment to welcome them, thank them for being in the space with us today. And so looking forward to our conversation. So from here, I'm going to stop my share and just first go around to Angela and Camilla and Rochelle. Starting with you, Angela, would love to, hear more about you and the work that you're doing in the Level Up space.
Great, thank you. So again, Angela Reynolds, CEO at YWCA Greater Pittsburgh. And to kind of talk about where we are, where I come from in terms of this space, I actually want to go to one of the comments that came off. I think you said it was called Slido, but whatever the polling mechanism was, where it said it's a long haul. So our association is over 150 years old. And so put that into context. We were around when women were fighting for the right to vote, right? And so a lot of things have changed from a societal perspective, but at the same time, putting into that context that while women had the right to vote, Black women did not have access to the vote. So we come at this from an intersectionality perspective. And I joined YWCA Greater Pittsburgh in 2020, and I had a chance to look at 2014 when we did the organization. I wasn't here, but the organization actually had a special on WQED about closing the wage gap. And then you get here in 2020 and there's still a gap. So it didn't close. And so we're in this for the long haul. And we actually do have hope, to take another one of those words, that that wage gap will be closed. We believe, however, that it is deliberate action. So you did ask for us to say I statements, but I speak for an organization where we actually have a vision, and we envision a community where people have access to education, opportunity, and equity, regardless of their race, age, gender, or their background. And that means being able to be paid fairly for the work that they are doing. From the I perspective, I had an opportunity for employment coming out of academia, where they asked for, it wasn't here, they treat me right here, but they, this particular opportunity asked me about my salary history. And for those of you who are not in academia, we're on an 8-month contract. And so in verifying that history, it was based on my 8 months, not for the fundraising I had done to carry the other 4 months of my salary, which would have kept me on par. So they didn't evaluate me based on my full 12 months. They took my salary history at 8. And so already I'm behind. And so looking at this to say, you know, that's just one example, but how many women are behind because they were not paid fairly at their previous employer, to be then able, you're going to use their salary history and just keep them in a behind stage where they can't catch up. And so I come at this space from a place of passion of how do we make sure that we're closing that gap for women more generally, but then also for all women. And I've noted this, and I'll turn it over to Camilla and Rochelle, but if we were to address the fact that all women do not reach that parity until March of the next year, if we only focused on March, women of color would still be behind. And so we have to center women of color in this discussion so that we can all get to the finish line and that we can close the wage gap for all.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Camilla.
You're muted, Camilla.
Classic. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Camilia Rivera-Tinsley, and as you all know, I work with the Women and Girls Foundation. Before coming to the Women and Girls Foundation, I spent almost 20 years working in small nonprofits in the environmental sector. So my view of this work really is rooted in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which talks about how do we look at our environments, and that includes people environments. How do we look at our environments in a holistic way? And one of the tenets and one of the pillars of the UN Sustainable Development Goals was making sure that women have equal voice, parity, and equal rights within these ecosystems that we exist in. So I think that I come to this space with a slightly different bent, but also with similar experiences. So I started off right out of college. I started working at a small nature center. I was the only person of color that worked at that nature center for at least 10 or 15 15 years. And I remember being that young person walking in and thinking about mostly how I had to prove myself and prove that I could fit into a space that wasn't typically and hadn't typically been my space. I wasn't raised around nature centers. I did not understand the nature center culture. I do remember that was my first foray into nonprofits and understanding like the close association with eating hummus and being a part of nonprofits. And so all of those things were just like small little spaces where really felt like I had to learn so that I could be accepted in this space. I also have the lived experience of being a single mother and raising my child by myself and also being in this nature center. And because I wanted to prove that I was as good as everyone else, I didn't want anyone to have a reason, to single me out. I actually, when I was pregnant, I used to sleep under my desk because I was so tired. But I didn't want anyone to think that I was slacking on the job. So I think about all of those little small things that I experienced. And I think about my space in the Women and Girls Foundation. So I've been with the Women and Girls Foundation for 2.5 years, but the foundation is 22 years old now at this point. And for its whole history and foundation, what the Women and Girls Foundation has been trying to do is remove any barriers for success for women and girls. And so removing barriers is very, very large. What does that mean? There are so many barriers that can stand in the way of our success. But I think what we've decided to focus on really is focusing on those economic policies that are going to stand in the way of our success. And so we partner with the YWCA and with the Black Women's Policy Center on this pay equity campaign because we've always been educating and talking about the pay disparity and the wage gap. We also talk about paid family and medical leave. So none of these policies exist by themselves, right? So there is this tax that women face because we are the kin keepers, generally speaking, of our families. And that's not to say that men don't have an important role, but how society has shaped things up to this point, women are the first ones to go out of work for childcare. We're also the first ones to go out of work when it comes to elder care. So I know that, I'm sitting right in that space of, having my child just go off to college and being like, oh, yes, now I can finally breathe. But then also thinking about my family and thinking about my aging parents who, were sick over these past years and recently within this year, both of them passed away. So I think thinking about these pressures that women face, it has always been apparent to me in my lived experience and more than ever in this space in the Women and Girls Foundation, how important it is for us to continually educate and advocate for policies that are going to protect and uplift women in this context. The other thing that the Women and Girls Foundation really focuses on is youth education. So we do have a program called Girl Gov, and that program is really about civics education and bridging the civics education gap. So I think a lot about me as that young person, not understanding how systems worked, not even understanding how policies and politics worked, but I was still a working person in the workspace. And that foundation that we lay is going to impact. So, not only are we not getting paid at the same rate as our male counterparts, but when we retire, we're looking at we live longer, and we are retiring with far less money than our male counterparts, which I see as all a crisis that we all need to be having conversation about. And I'll stop talking because we won't have anything to talk about. Rochelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, we have lots to talk about, so I've been taking some notes too. So, but yeah, let me turn things over to Rochelle.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I apologize. As you can see, I am talking to you from my vehicle. I'm en route from one in-person meeting to this panel, but I'm happy to be here with you to talk about this very important topic. And I came, by way of this work just through my own personal experience. My work that I do at the Black Women's Policy Center and for the 25 plus years that I have spent doing public policy advocacy is rooted in my own personal experience as a single mom. I was born and raised in the Pittsburgh region. I raised 4 children as a single mom. I was married at a very young age, started my family. Unfortunately, found myself as a victim of domestic violence and had to flee that situation and essentially build a new life for myself and my children. And I worked really hard. I was in college at the time when I experienced my divorce and had to drop out of school. Found a way to get back into school and to get some financial support to support me through community college. Worked my way through that, and got, a really, great job in the medical field. And I worked, it was my first experience as a Black woman. I lived in a community mostly around folks who looked like me. And so really hadn't had any professional work experiences with biases, I guess you could say. And so I graduated from that program and I was certified. And I went to work at a hospital in a department of 40 women. And I was the only one who looked like me in that department. I was also the only one who was able to do a new job in the department because I had certification from the state and no one else in the department had it. And for that reason, I was singled out, and I faced a lot of biases, shall I say? And it really resulted. It was my first experience, but for me, it was really really impactful because I had worked really hard to get through school, to get that certification, and to get that job, and I was ready to build a career, and to be faced with that just simply on the basis of my sex and my race was really something I'll never forget, as you can see. And this, we're talking over 25 years ago, 30 years ago actually, when this occurred. So needless to say, my own experiences and the women around me is really what fueled my passion to get into public policy advocacy, and I've been doing it for more than 25 years. I've sat at many tables. Most of my work does revolve around economic justice because poverty, unfortunately, is the number one issue Black women are facing in this region and throughout this country. And so I've worked in different ways in terms of tackling economic justice. But the Level Up campaign was really something that was really near and dear to my heart, and I was happy to work on from my own experience, but also knowing that for me personally, how hard I work and what I bring to the table, as an employer, as an employee, and just in terms of education experience, just willingness to contribute to the, and to know that folks are not being paid their worth. And simply, poverty is not the absence of income. It is really a cycle of perpetuating factors, one of which is pay equity or pay inequity. And so if we're going to ever solve the problem of poverty for women, Black women and children, we have to talk about what those issues that are contributing to that. And unfortunately, pay equity is one of those issues that is contributing to the poverty of Black women in this region. So, of course, we do center Black women in this work, but we know that as Black women start to win and we strive and no longer are, we're not just thriving, but we're actually thriving, that all women will win. So the work that we're doing benefits all women. It doesn't just benefit Black women, but we do center Black women because we do know that disproportionately we're impacted differently than other women. And like Angela said, we celebrated Equal Pay Day, for women yesterday, but for Black women, Equal Pay Day is not until July 10th. So we have to work extra hard just to, kind of get, a little bit of movement forward.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I know we'll talk about Equal Pay Day in a moment, but and just, tell everybody what that is, but I want to, and I'll send this out to all of you to really know, and I think all of you have hit on this in different ways, but what is the origin of the Level Up campaign and what does it specifically advocate for in the Pittsburgh region? And
I'll start with the origin, and Rochelle, if you could speak to the pillars. But the origin really came from an opportunity that arose as I transitioned into my position. Camilla transitioned into a position at Women and Girls Foundation after the launch. But coming through again, looking at that WQED special from 2014 and actually seeing like physical banners and everything that we had at our old offices on Wood Street. And I'm like, what's going on with this? And being able to then take that opportunity that arose to say, okay, we're working on this. I knew that Rochelle was working on these issues and had conversations with the prior head of Women and Girls Foundation, who I also knew was working on these issues. And really, it was just a matter of what could we collectively do together? I mean, we all want to close the wage gap. We all want to expand opportunities for women, and particularly with thinking about all of the advocacy work that Women and Girls Foundation does, and actually taking middle schoolers and high schoolers to the Hill. So to say, how could we leverage our resources as teams to really accelerate this work moving forward and actually see some changes as it relates to closing the wage gap. And then from there, then deciding, okay, so what are the objectives of the campaign? So we can say closing the wage gap, but what's the how? And so like really looking at some very specific ways of doing that. And I do want to speak to one pillar before we go into all 5 of the pillars. But as we were doing this as YWCA Greater Pittsburgh, it was also a matter of looking internally to say, okay, what are some changes that we can make? And I get that, yes, there still remain cultural biases. They're out there. But it's also some deliberate action that you can take as an organization. And they're actions that actually others have taken before. And so I do want to speak specifically to pay transparency and salary transparency. We at the time were not posting what the salary was for the positions on the job posting. It was a quick change. It was a matter of me going to HR and saying, post the salary range for the position, and then it being posted, right? It wasn't hard. And there are actually 14 states in the District of Columbia that have legislation that requires pay transparency. Pay transparency helps everyone. And so it also saved us some time because then we weren't getting people at the offer stage saying, oh, well, I can't come for that amount of money. You already know once it's posted whether or not this is going to work for you and your family, and still allowing opportunity for negotiation because we have a range. But again, it was a matter of saying, like, you can make a deliberate policy. And so that is where we are with this Level Up campaign. What are some deliberate actions, some concrete steps that can be taken that we know will help to close the wage gap, but then also just make for better workplaces for everyone? Camilla or Rochelle, if you'd like to speak to the other pillars or other explanations for that question.
And
I'm sorry, I was having some technological challenges. You did a really good job. I think the only other, couple of things, I just wanted to reinforce that we're not the 5 pillars we're not saying that every employer who agrees that this is something that they want to work towards, that they acknowledge that this may be an issue for their company and we want to work towards it. We're not asking that all 5, pillars be achieved already or next year. What we're asking is that they just take the steps, to moving forward. Maybe they're strong on pillar 1, not so strong on pillar 5. So maybe that they want to focus on 5. But we just, it's a partnership. This is not an adversarial relationship. We really do want to partner with employers to help them discover best practices, ways that they can do it, any costs involved, minimize that, because we really want to achieve. It's a win. It's a win-win. It's a win for women, right? But it's also a win for the employer. So just asking things like adhering to the law that's already in place, the labor law that we already have in place in this country, right? Are you adhering to that? Are your employees aware, of their rights under this law? And do they feel like they're, that their rights are being complied to? Just salary history is something that we, folks need to think about, and what that, how that creates barriers for women in particular whenever they're being asked what their, their salary history, versus focusing on what skills, what talents does she bring to the table? What is her experience? You know what I mean? That's where the focus should be, not necessarily what were you paid on your other job. You know what I mean? So those are, some of the things that I think we are just asking, and even just really taking a really thorough look at your company. You know what I mean? Sometimes as a CEO, or a director of a department, you may be a little far removed from what's actually happening in human resources. So committing to just doing some sort of internal, analysis and evaluation to determine, are my employees all being paid equitably, in comparison to education and training and experience. I don't think they're major things. I mean, they can be small things, small steps, for big wins.
Yeah, and I just want to back that up by saying I think it's really easy and important for employers to be collecting demographic information about their employees so that you can do those benchmark reviews, and those benchmark reviews are attached to actual data that can move things along. So I think that that's really, really important for employers, and one of the pillars. I wanted to look at this question here in the chat. So it says employee relations professionals are concerned that posting pay ranges would cause issues. I think that it's always going to be that there are going to be people that are afraid, some based in true fear, some because they prefer to protect their places of power. But I think one thing that we can do is to look to those other 13 states to see how they have been impacted and to form working groups across state lines so that professionals or so that employers can talk to other large employers in these states where this has been implemented. And I wonder what my colleagues think about that.
It's interesting because I had unmuted to also respond to that question in the chat as well. And so one of the things that we've also been looking at as we do our analysis, and so we are working on an employer and some employer guidance and also some employee guidance as part of this, looking at some model practices across the nation. That said, there may be issues, and you can't stop those issues from occurring. But what are we doing in terms of not only just posting pay transparency, but also being more open about the process? What is the methodology? So for example, within our organization, we had an external reviewer go through and look at our pay grades and making that available so that it didn't appear as though there's just Angela in a back room deciding on a napkin what the pay ranges were going to be. It's actually based on a market analysis using several different sources. And so making that methodology available, in addition to also keep HR's doors open so that when people have questions, that there are actually differences in responsibilities. And so yes, for those are in a director position and have varying levels of responsibility versus someone who's on the front line, why are those pay grades different? And therefore the pay ranges are different as well. In addition to doing that, it's understanding that there's also a culture in valuing people and valuing their work. And so how do we make sure that we're acknowledging that value for the individual and the work that they're doing, while at the same time within the organization providing opportunities for advancement? So those are coming through. One of the pillars that we have as part of Level Up is doing a compensation analysis on some type of regular basis. You need to figure out what that is for your company. We have determined that annually is a challenge because by the time we do the analysis and implementation, the next annual review is set to come up. But every 3 years or so, doing an analysis of compensation to make sure that it remains equitable and that it also is meeting market standards. So yes, I really appreciate that question that you put in the chat, Gwen. But I also want to be transparent to say that while we can quell fears, we cannot stop them from emerging.
Yeah, I thought it was a great question, and it's interesting because I've been in previous positions where I experienced that, where the pay ranges were not there, and then suddenly they were there, and there were lots of questions. So I think it goes back to your comment, Angela, of this is deliberate and it's also intentional. So I think you're not saying, okay, well, tomorrow I'll go out and put those pay ranges out there and it'll all be fine. I think it's more of, okay, let's think this through. How are we going to put our pay ranges out there? Are we going to talk with staff first before we do this? Have a plan, in place. I think is also what you're saying, because I remember that very clearly, and I was a manager at the time and saying, well, this new job is making more than me, type of thing, and it did end up causing some friction in a small organization also. So yeah. So
I will say that sometimes when you are making changes, there is going to be some friction. There are hard conversations that you have to have, and there are going to be moments of reflection where you have to think, maybe we are not valuing this person the way that they should be valued. And so, yes, hard conversations do happen and need to happen.
right. Yeah. Thanks for that. Thank you.
Conversations, and I also will say sometimes changes in compensation, because there is a possibility that this new person coming in is making more than someone else within the organization who's doing the same job. And so how do those corrections get put into place? And again, that's part of the planning beforehand, before the release, to say, are there corrections that we need to make as an organization?
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for that. That's great. So what is equitable compensation? we've been talking about it, we've been using the words, we've been talking about pay equity and the wage gap, but what is equitable compensation?
Sorry, Rochelle, that you were muted already. I wasn't sure if you wanted to go first. So paying people fairly for the work that they are doing and looking at the entire compensation package. So it is also inclusive of benefits and also inclusive of any type of paid leave policies that are at the organization, and making sure that that is being consistently applied across all positions is important.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about the full compensation package also. So you're talking about the benefits, you're talking about PTO, you're talking about all of those things that create that complete compensation package, correct? Yeah. Okay.
I also think that equitable pay should be absent from biases like she's a mom, she's got small children, you know, she may not be available in evenings and weekends, you know, childcare may be a problem during the, you know, summer care, you know, those things that can present biases, you know, that really don't have anything to do with how she's able to perform for the company, right? And so it really should be based off of her experience, her skill, her talent, you know. So what Angela said, but also not creating these buckets where they're over here because they're women and they're childbearing age or they have small children, you know, like those kind of considerations. That's when biases come in, and you start to make different differentiations, right? And that's where that gender divide happens. And, you know, just, you know, so that, you know, I think equitable pay is absent from that.
Thank you for saying that, Rochelle. And because also as I look at the benefits, like I have heard conversations, I'm not saying here, I'm just saying more generally, where also people look, as it relates to benefits, well, this person is married, they can get onto their spouse's benefits. Well, then that's not equitable compensation, which is why we need to look at the entire package.
Yeah, so there's an assumption that there will be coverage from a spouse, and just making that assumption without really clarifying, but you don't have a whole package. So, okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Camilla, did you want to add anything or?
Yeah, I did. And it looks like someone, Allison, made a comment that actually was in line with what I was thinking, which is how do you, as the hiring manager, start from a place of education? And how do you create a culture of equitable hiring practices before you're hiring your staff? And I think that has to do with having conversations like this, understanding the real stats. It's not just, you know, people complaining or people wanting to say, oh, poor, woe is me, but looking at the stats and the math behind how women are faring, and how the different, these different barriers are affecting us. So that goes back to what Rochelle was talking about, you know, not thinking about like, oh, well, this person, you know, they're not going to be able to get childcare. And also, really, what are we doing to educate our staff as they come in? Because statistics are going to bear out that women are going to ask for raises less often. They're going to use different language to negotiate, and they're going to have different barriers within their life. And so I think equity means you are understanding those things and you are planning for those eventualities.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So thinking that through. No, I think that's very interesting to think about. Can any of you also share some trends that you are seeing in the greater Pittsburgh region, either or negative or positive? We know that the Black women and women of color, this is very, very much affected by this within the greater Pittsburgh region, but wondering in terms of what are you seeing positive trends and also possibly challenges within the greater Pittsburgh region? What are some disparities that we locally really need to address?
I would like to start by applauding the city and the county administrations. So, and then also put a plug in to watch the live stream of the press conference that we had on yesterday regarding equal pay day. But we do know that there have been changes that have happened from a procedural basis and executive order at both the county level and also at the city of Pittsburgh level to create more equitable places, and then also looking at some of these issues that are related to the gender pay equity campaign. That said, that is the city and that is the county, and it also applies to their workforce. We still need, and so when you say challenges as well, we are also looking for what is that statewide legislation that would then cover employers more generally so that all workers are supported, whether or not they are a city or a county employee. So again, great in terms of seeing those trends, seeing more states that have made the legislation as it relates to pay transparency, actually seeing some employers within this region who are posting the pay ranges on their job postings that when we started this campaign weren't, and we're seeing them now. So that has been also very positive. And then also seeing more employers who are removing salary history, because again, as I noted earlier on, that is also a factor that keeps this gender wage gap from decreasing at the level that it could. So great to see some that are doing it at an individual basis and would like to see it more broadly implemented across the region.
Camilla,
I think what, yeah, I was just going to say, I think what Angela said was great. The only thing that I would add to that is that I think from a positive perspective that we are having conversations like this, right? This is something that we were not really doing much of. We may have commemorated Equal Pay Day from our own sort of lanes on those days, but just to come together collectively, like Angela said, city, county, the Level Up campaign sort of coming together and really lifting this issue up, because you can't address what you don't first acknowledge. So I think just the acknowledgement and awareness of the issue in this region in particular, I think is something positive that has, come from this work that we're doing. And so I'm excited that we're continuing to still have these conversations and, the growth of the campaign and us as a region in this space.
Great. Camilla, was there something you'd like to add?
No, I think my colleagues did a wonderful job.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. All
Oh,
right, well,
and if I could add one more trend that I'm seeing is actually there are more, maybe I'm just more aware of it in terms of women, particularly those that are entering the workforce, that are seeking out some skills related to salary negotiation. And so actually we will be having a salary negotiation training that will be coming up, and we'll make sure that we share that with you so that you can share that out
please.
as well. But more that are because of the raising awareness are saying, so let me start negotiating my salary. Let me actually start doing some more research in terms of what this position should be paying.
Yeah, it's so important. I've worked at previous jobs where, I have asked for a raise and then people say, oh, I wasn't expecting that. I'm like, okay, well, or coaching coworkers to say, you need to ask every year, you need to say why, you need to do the research. So that's really it's an important skill to have. So appreciate that too. Well, let's talk about Equal Pay Day. It was yesterday, March 25th. We know that it kind of changes every year depending on how things are going. It was Equal Pay Day in general, probably more so for white women, but you've also highlighted that for Black women, it doesn't hit until July. But could you tell us a little bit more about Equal Pay Day? And your colleague Kate has also dropped in the link to the presser, so I'm glad that we have that in there. But would love to hear more about Equal Pay Day.
Are you mean Equal Pay Day in terms of what it is?
Yes.
Just explain.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, in terms of what it is.
Okay.
Yes. Excuse me.
Yeah. So Equal Pay Day is really just the day that marks the day when a woman, yesterday marked the day that a white woman will have earned what her white male counterpart earned by December of last year. So it takes her, several extra months. And as I mentioned previously, the date for Black women, July 10th. By July 10th, a Black woman will have earned what her white male counterpart earned by December of the last year. And so there are other dates that we acknowledge there in terms of just the different categories. Latino women, it's broken down by race when sort of those benchmarks. And I want to say it goes as late as October, maybe September, October.
November, Rochelle. For Native
November.
women,
Wow.
it's not until November, a whole year almost.
Did you
Right.
say, Angela, did you say Native women? Is that
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So when you look, and it's and as Rochelle noted, this is national, and we've already had data that shows that for the Pittsburgh region, for particularly for Black women, the dates are later than national. But yes,
Okay.
so for Black women, Rochelle already said it's in July. For Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian, it's not until August, late August. Latino women, October 8th.
Okay.
Native women, November 18th.
Yeah, and as Angela mentioned, in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh is much lower in terms of the percentage rate, the cents on the dollar. We are at about 58 cents on the dollar for Black women in this region. Nationally, it's about 66 cents, which means that although July 10th is the day nationally for Black women to have reached equal pay, in this region, it likely will not be until like October, November-ish, probably, for women in this region to have reached the same amount that a white man reached by the end of December of last year.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And it's stunning, not stunning to think about all the different dates. But knowing that this continues to be a persistent issue, particularly for Greater Pittsburgh region and then across the nation also. I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I'm like surprised that we're almost at 10 to 1. I want to make sure that there's time for, folks in the audience to ask you any specific questions that they have. And, everyone who is in attendance, if you have a question, please drop those in the chat or raise your hand and you can unmute. But I want to ask all of you to talk a little bit about how can we get more involved? If we want to get more involved with this, if we want to actually help out, join a committee, how can we do that? And so we'd love to hear you talk about that, please.
Kate, since you're dropping things in, I'm going to ask you if you could please drop the Level Up Greater Pittsburgh campaign website into the chat. And we also have it on each one of our websites as well. So you can come to us through any one of those avenues. And that's important for us. We want to make sure that everyone has access to this. And I will also say I'm following us on our social media. So YWCA Greater Pittsburgh on our social media. We already post about this, and so you'll see information there. Kate had already dropped in the salary negotiation training, save the date. So another way to engage is coming in there. On the website, you'll see an opportunity to share your story. And we know that it's hard to be vulnerable and to share your story in that way. However, as you noted, when the three of us did our introductions, we each had a story to tell, and we're part of a community. And to be able to let people know, as Camilla said on yesterday, that you're not alone, that that there are others who are in this space, and collectively, it's not to just rehash and be into a place of, constantly going over and over again, but to share that collective experience so that we can make progress. When people just see statistics, they forget the human behind it. And so it's really important for us to put that storytelling narrative with the numbers.
Yeah, that's great.
And if you are in a space and you feel like you have the power, collective power within your workspace to ask your HR manager or to ask your supervisor about whether your organization has heard of the Level Up campaign. And if you feel comfortable to talk about why you think it would be important to have those kinds of conversations within the workplace. I know that the space that we're in right now, sociopolitically, is a very challenging one, but these are also times when we need to speak up more than ever. And I think also, since we are in these challenging spaces, it's going to be really, really important to stay connected to the organizations that are on this call, because there is power in numbers and there's power in us banding together to be able to protect one another and to be able to provide that voice and to provide those stories.
Yeah, I think my colleagues did a really good good job summing it up. I guess I would just add that if you are an employer who is on this call today and are listening to us and want to work with us on the Level Up campaign, Kate, who has been dropping things into the chat, links and all kind of goodies, is also a point of contact. So I don't know if Kate might want to leave her email. We would love to engage with you individually as an employer to just talk about, kind of the landscape of your company, and if there's any ways that we can support your work that you're doing within the company itself, or if we can connect you to best practices or any other resources.
Yeah, no, this is great. Yeah, I'm gonna hold for any questions. And I have a question. This is it's going a little farther afield, but each of you, as you introduced yourselves and talked about some of your experiences, around salary history, around salary ranges, but also around your workplace. What came up for me is this idea of workplace inclusion and how you either felt included or excluded. And I do think that pay equity is a part of inclusion. But I was wondering if you also have some words for our audience around, what does it mean to have an inclusive workplace? Because that is what we at Vibrant Pittsburgh are very, thinking about and concerned about this idea of workplace inclusion and also belonging. Each of you kind of hit a little bit on that of like how you either felt, included or excluded. So what, along with pay equity, what are some things that you would love to see in the region employers be doing for their staff, for their employees, to make them feel as a culture? And I talk about it being a culture add, not a culture fit. You are a wonderful addition to the organization. So how do we promote that idea?
So I think that one of the things that we have collectively, I think the three partners here that we've said from the very beginning, that although we are focusing on pay equity, that this campaign has always been about much more in terms of just creating sort of a family-friendly workplace for women in general. And so one of the things that comes to my mind is it's actually work that I'm actually doing in another lane is around just embracing motherhood. So there's a law, it's called the Pump Act, that was enacted in 2022, which really is a requirement for employers to create space for women within the workplace to be able to pump, right, for nursing moms. So what that does is it creates it's an inclusive environment. It says that we can appreciate and we embrace that you are a new mom and that pumping is important to you, and we're going to make sure that you have adequate accommodations and that provide you with the time to be able to do what you need to do as a mom, and knowing that this actually makes you a better employee. Being able to be a mom, and you can balance both. But I think those are the kind of things that I think of when I think of sort of this greater sort of umbrella of equity in the workplace and inclusivity, is being able to embrace all aspects of employees, right? Women, men, doesn't matter. And one of the things that comes with some women is the ability to be able to be a mom, to nurse, and to pump, be able to pump. So that's something just concrete that came to my mind.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thanks. Yeah.
And I'd also like to speak to listening to employees and having opportunities for employees and various levels of leadership to connect so that decisions are being made from that perspective of the person who is working, as opposed to leadership just deciding this is how things are going to be. In addition to what Rochelle said, just looking at people's intersections more generally, and saying, are there any barriers to this individual being their full self within the workplace, and how can we remove those barriers within this climate? I am wondering what will happen as it relates to some of the great work that has been happening around acknowledging biases and addressing them, and making sure that we're continuing to see how biases creep into the workplace and actually make them not inclusive environments. And I'm hoping that that type of work will still continue at our organizations and the companies that are represented here.
Great.
Yeah, so I'll piggyback off of that and say that I think that affinity spaces have always been important. And affinity spaces to me are spaces of community and spaces of conversation. I also wonder, I think that some of those spaces will go away And I wonder what we can do as employers to say, okay, if I can't do this in this space, what are lanes and opportunities that I can provide, sort of tangential to work, or maybe, right after work, that are going to improve building community, and
Mhm.
allowing people to show up in the workspace as who they are. And I think a lot of, not all, but many biases are just born of not having exposure, not being around people, not being in community with people, not having conversations. So I think that, a big part of creating an inclusive workspace is creating those spaces for guided conversation if possible.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting sometimes an interesting statistic that a lot of white people do not have Black friends, or they do not have friends from other cultures. And so they just don't know them. And then they also are not aware of the biases that come up then also for them, and that do sort of like ripple up through the workplace. So being able to have conversations, and if they need to be guided conversations, and be allies to each other, I think that's great. So yeah, so thank you. Thank you so much for that. Well, we are getting up to 1 o'clock. I'm going to start sharing my screen again. Folks, if you have questions, feel free to drop those in. But I have just one more short, easy quiz for all of you, and I think that you're going to know the answers to these. But the Level Up campaign seeks to improve our region's economy, strengthen our region's organizations, build strength for our region's families. Or is it all of the above? And I think we know the answer to this question. The answer to this question is yes, all of the above. The Level Up campaign seeks to improve the region's economy, our regions and organizations, and then also our families. So I really encourage all of you to get involved in any way that you can to help with the Level Up campaign. Think about the things that you can do, those deliberate actions that Angela spoke to us about at the beginning, deliberate actions you can do within your workplaces. Who can you talk to, have this conversation with? So I want to give Angela and Camilla and Rochelle the last words. Anything you want to leave us with as we start to, shall we say, file out of the space? And I also want to say thank you so much for this time together. But I want to turn it over to the three of you for some last words.
My only last word is just visit leveluppa.com website, sign the pledge, and join the fight.
Great. Thank you. Thanks.
Ditto, and thank you, and also applauding Vibrant Pittsburgh for the work that you do for the D, all of the above on that list.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just say for everyone to stay curious about the world around them, stay curious about themselves and how other people are moving through the world. And to me, education and starting as early as possible is extremely important. So I encourage people to have conversations with their children, to have conversations with their daughters, and to think about what are the seeds that we are planting for our young people as they come up, and what is the world that we leave for them.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, what are the seeds we're planting, and what is the world that we leave for them is very important. It's always important. It's particularly important now. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate today very much. And as always, at Vibrant Pittsburgh, we're going to drop in. You can keep in touch with Vibrant Pittsburgh, at all of our social media channels. In the chat, there should be, contact with Kate. Kate Ellison is the main contact for all of the three folks that we're talking with here today. If you have any questions for Matthew or myself, please be in touch with us. And again, I want to say thank you so very much to Angela, to Camilla, and to Rochelle for your time today, for everything that you shared. And we look forward to continuing this work with you in partnership. So thank you, everyone. Have a great Wednesday and a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye, everyone.
Bye.